Salutations and welcome to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today on the podcast we are so excited to welcome author, practicing occultist, and Hermetic Magician, Frater Ashen Chassan. Frater Chassan's new book is called Gateways Through Light and Shadow, which is a follow-up to his highly praised 2013 magical tome, Gateways Through Stone and Circle. In this podcast, we discuss Frater Chassan's new book, how he works with his Scrier and magical operations, the importance of sincerity in all magical pursuits, talisman crafting, and what this thing called Grimoire hopping is really all about. Frater Chassan also shares some tips with the magical community about how to talk to your spouse or significant other if they totally don't get magic at all, and how you can ease their concerns. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, I give you Frater Ashen Chassan. Frater Chassan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
The pleasure is certainly mine, Frater Chassan. I know we have so much to get into. Let's begin, if we may, with your new, much-anticipated, and highly acclaimed book from Azoth Press, entitled Gateways Through Light and Shadow. And just to give a brief summary for the listeners who might not be aware, this is a follow-up tome from your 2013 book, a very honest, open, and groundbreaking account called Gateways Through Stone and Circle, and that's where you took readers on a step-by-step analysis and construction and eventually conducting the Grimoire, drawing spirits into crystals, as found in the Magus and attributed to Trithemius. And this new book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow, that you've penned is just getting such fantastic praise. It's a much expanded account. It's a kind of a magician's journal, so to speak, that records the experiences of yourself and your gifted Scrier that you both go through. So I guess, can you just talk a little bit about, Frater Chassan, this book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow, and just can you share with us how you first got the idea to write a follow-up to your original work?
Sure. So kind of the way that it took place, at least initially, was my Scrier was also a longtime friend, has been practicing his own magical path for quite a while, working on his seership abilities, but it's been within the Celtic kind of druidic system. And the whole thing got started when he came over one day and he wanted to do some hypnosis and this astral projection kind of spirit travel exercise that we do, and I use a certain kind of formula in hypnosis to get people to experience these really kind of amazing otherworldly encounters. And I did on the premise that he would totally encounter either one of his ancestors or one of the Celtic pantheon, but it ended up being this angelic being, much to both of our surprise. He encountered this being, and we asked the name. It was not someone I had ever heard of before, but later we researched and we found the name actually located in the Bible, in the Old Testament. It was a translation of one of these angels, which we thought was fascinating. But through the encounter, the biggest thing was this angel says, the two of you need to work together. You need to start doing this magical work together. And I thought that was quite interesting because I was telling him about it. He was familiar with my first book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, where I had contacted these planetary angels, but he had never had any experience with anything like that. He was not trained in Hermetic magical arts, and it just wasn't particular his path that he had studied. So I thought this was a fantastic time to kind of take him through, at first, a series of initiatory sort of magical experiences, and then to see if we could contact the archangels together using the same system that I had done by myself. And I was really curious to see if he would be able to see anything, and if he did encounter these angels, would they look similar to what I saw, and would they pretty much tell him the same, kind of have the same information. So it began that way, where at first I thought, it was like, well, if he's going to go through this path, I should really take him through the elemental realms and those associations first. And it began with these exercises of having him, at first through hypnosis and getting into this deep trance state, and also scrying the top, was experiencing the elemental realms. And those experiments ended up being quite dynamic and powerful, and the information that he received just through the encounters and speaking through the beings of those experiments were just so amazing that I thought that for sure, we would be able to encounter these angels. And I thought, we should really start recording this, well, because it looks like some important information is coming across, and this will be a great time to have a record of not only my own working, but shared experiences, shared working with me and one of my greatest friends, and who became my Scrier. That was definitely the premise and the continued work for the book. We kind of started with that, and with each experiment and experience, it started becoming even more dynamic and just more interesting, the kind of information that would come across. So it began at first me trying to record everything by hand, which didn't work too well. There's too many things coming across. I couldn't write that fast. It really gave me some respect for John Dee back in the day, being able to write legibly, as the Scrier must have been speaking rather quickly, or at least, in tone. So I began audio recording the experiences to make sure that I got all of the data correct, word for word, everything that my Scrier was accounting, relating, and experiencing himself.
Frater Chassan, can you talk about that awesome relationship, as you mentioned, between yourself and your gifted Scrier, Ben? After doing so many groundbreaking, consciousness-expanding, awesome operations together, and after sharing so many experiences, can you talk a little bit about how your relationship has evolved over the years, in ways changed, and how it's stayed the same from that very first operation that you did together?
Sure. So even going back, I guess, a bit further, we became friends because of a mutual interest in the Celtic spirituality before I started getting into Grimoire and traditional Western Hermetic esoteric practice. I was very much involved in a Celtic and a Druidic path that way. It was a lot of interest. I have some Irish and my background, and it was something that still does hold a lot of interest in kind of personal effects for me. But we met through that way, and we kind of discovered the Celtic path together, and would get together and celebrate these traditional holidays with our friends and family. And we spent a lot of time just conversing, the two of us, really trying to understand the system. And my friend Ben has just done an amazing job. He took his studies way beyond when I started getting into the Grimoire work. He has been studying Irish, learning how to speak Irish Gaelic quite fluently. He has his own practice that he does twice daily in this working, and has really taken his, this own path to its heights. And I am excited to say that he is doing his own work continuously in that, even though the shared experiences were something beyond anything either of us had encountered before. And it was so nice having him there. For one, having that previous friendship and that bond. He has been the most trustworthy and the most genuine person I've ever known, regardless of this work. And I think that, as being a fact in this work, made things not only possible, but really, really viable for me. That, he wasn't going to make something up just to appease me. He wasn't, he's not given to prawns of fantasy. Everything that he experiences and does in life, he's very genuine in the way that he interacts with that and with other people. So that is a huge thing. The biggest moments when, after these workings, we would come out of the magical chamber just in awe, and several times going, no one's going to ever believe this. I mean, this is just incredible. And we would talk about it for hours on end, and my wife always comments on how she really appreciates that she was privy. She would be upstairs a lot of times when we came up from these workings. We would be talking to each other, and then she would be, asking some questions, and she was just blown away about how we had the shared experience and just how involved it was. And it's so nice having somebody else that has seen these beings, that has heard them, that's been in the room, and everything lights up, and all of these effects are going on, and tears are coming to her eyes, and it's definitely made us a close friend beyond anything. I guess you wouldn't say mundanely. I mean, friends are great to have, but to have somebody in your life that has directly been through the same experiences that you have, and some of definitely the most incredible experiences I've encountered in my life or in these books, and to be able to share that with him, have somebody else there experiencing this with you is kind of beyond words. But it's such a blessing. It's so nice, so that when we get together and we go, oh, you remember how this goes, and he was like, yeah, that was just so incredible. And at the same time, he very much appreciates the book and this coming across, because it was one of those things that when we were doing these experiments, they were so novel and different than anything else, and his senses were being flooded with all of this stuff going on. And he admitted that afterwards. He's like, I remember it and everything, but it's hard to remember everything that was said and all the details. He's like, it's kind of like meeting a celebrity that you've idolized your entire life, and then you get to sit down with them for 15 minutes and it's wonderful, but afterwards you're trying to recall it because you're almost in a state of shock. I mean, that's kind of what it was attributed to. So it's nice to have this and to go back through, and he's able to account even more details of the experience, as well as myself.
That is absolutely beautiful to hear, and that special relationship that you share, just being such a bedrock of the line of ceremonial magic that you practice. And you, Frater Chassan, just touched on something that I know you've said both in previous podcast interviews and on your blog, is the issue of, and you just touched on it here, the issue of sincerity. Perhaps we could just talk about this a little bit, because I think there might be some in the esoteric community or the Solomonic magic community, myself included certainly when I was first starting to learn about this, who might not understand this issue that you touch on about sincerity. They might think, oh, perfect, I just bought the Goetia of Dr. Rudd, and I'm going to go through, I'm going to map out all these cool-looking circles, and I'm going to do everything according to the book with all of the, celestial implements and everything. But can you talk about that extra element of sincerity and, as you so beautifully put it, just getting out of your own way and experiencing that kind of divine flow of energy? Can you talk about, what does sincerity mean to you when you practice magic?
Definitely. I think that's an excellent question, too. When it comes to the practice of magic, and especially in evocation, when you're conversing with these spiritual beings, that there's so much interest and also so much hype within the occult community to be able to achieve this and sometimes more get the things that you want. And it really becomes a barrage of this conscious desire to be able to undertake these and get some sort of sense of power, to be able to interact with these beings, and then to have them grant wishes for you, basically. And even admittedly, when I first began, I began the same way. It was very intriguing that way, and it seemed like something fascinating and exciting to kind of go through. And there is that, but I do think that a lot of early magicians, when they're getting into evocation, they really do get in their own way. There's a lot of presumption about what's supposed to be. And sometimes when they conduct these experiments, they don't go quite the way that their imagination told them it would. They start immediately looking for alternatives and reading stuff from this person and that person who has all these contradictory remarks. And it tends to be this kind of conscious manipulation about how this stuff is supposed to work. And when it comes to sincerity, my own path, and again, there's other people that have seemed to have achieved, relative degrees of success doing other things. But, acknowledging the Grimoire for what it is and starting there and working and honoring not only, making the tools and everything as it's described in the book, but also following the invocations and really having a sense of, this is something sacred. If you really do have the belief and the aspiration that you're going to be contacting and communicating with some of the most powerful and amazing beings that are in existence, like if you're really going to have these conversations and they're not just in your own mind and it's not just a play of imagination and visualization, then you're going to take your time. It's like, I guess, the analogy of that celebrity. If it's somebody that you really respect, and it's not just a temporary hype and excitement thing, but if it's somebody that is important to you, something that you really want to put your best foot forward, you're going to put sincerity on, not falsely, but trying to present yourself and greet that person in the most respectful, the best way possible to show them that they're deserving of that respect, that the whole situation is something that is important to you. And I think that's really the way to lay the bedrock of how somebody, should practice something that really takes this stuff seriously. And within the tools and the way that I do the invocations and the way that we practice that, it is done from the standpoint of we are doing a sacred practice, first, foremost, lastly, and always, that regardless of if they're answering our questions, if they appear the way that we hope they would, if they're granting our requests, that's wonderful. But the whole practice is we are doing something sacred to meet these very amazing beings, and the aspect of whatever we can, that they will appear to us, that they will speak to us. And I think it really takes a dedication and an openness, a willingness, and definitely a risk as well to put yourself out there, to do as best that you can regardless of what initially may happen, and to keep going. And when they appear and when that communication is initiated, to really stand in that place of sacredness as this magical act really is. It's just really a sacred act, a very holy endeavor in the sense of each part of it is a union from the innermost soul of your person to whatever the aspect and whatever the spirit is and their totality, and a meeting place in between where the exchange can actually happen. And I guess the truth of that, or the pursuit of that, is how I try to consider the whole act of evocation. It's a very, very serious thing. It's a sacred thing. It's not to be taken lightly, and it is a chance to be as authentic as you can in a very, very unknown situation. It's kind of a paradox that way.
The issue that you raise about sincerity reminds me of, can't remember if it's specifically a Chinese fable or tale, but certainly in Asia, where there was a really big dragon collector. This person loved collecting statues of dragons, coins of dragons, was on pillows of dragons, and just loved dragons. And then one day the dragons heard about this and came to this guy's door. The guy opened the door, saw the dragon, and immediately died of fright. Just was not expecting this, which is, I think, what you're saying, which is you can spend years, posting cool pictures of the circles and posting different things, but if you don't have that quality that I think you embody so well, that kind of honest inquisition into not only yourself but into the magical act itself, then really you could spend years and not get the results that you might be seeking after.
Definitely, and yeah, you do see that within the magical community, and it's difficult. And even myself, pushing through those times where you give it your all, you make and do everything to the very best ability. And sometimes it falling through and having that ego hurt. But I think there's so many people who are excellent in other fields where it's the same story, that failure, difficulty, or when the imagination, doesn't uphold, to their grandiose ideas and everything, that they keep going, they don't stop just because they hit a brick wall. It's something that is sacred beyond just getting what you want and meeting expectations. It's moving past that and going, I'm committed to do this, so I'm going to keep going, even though I hit a very difficult time. And I think that in so many aspects, not just in magic, in life in general, in whatever pursuit that someone pursues, an athlete, whatever, is they are that athlete, they are that magician, they are that expert at what they do, not just because of some sort of natural talent, but because meeting any kind of difficulty or even, brick walls, they keep going because there's just no alternative considered. It is what they are passionate to do. And I think that's also a very big part of this.
Absolutely. I remember reading a passage from Ceremonial Magic and the Power of Evocation, quoting some, well, we'll just leave them as unnamed Golden Dawn. Oh, it was Aleister Crowley. But talking about there's no magic without tears, effectively, and pushing through that. Would that be kind of hinting at what you're talking about facing difficulty, and even in the face of not even seeing results or pushing through something, just kind of continuing to show that fidelity to the system, to the grimoire, and to the process?
Definitely, and I think there is something to that. There's magic, regardless of what it's pursued for, what it's used for, simply practical ends, a part of someone's spiritual pursuits. There's always this blending, because if somebody works in earnest, when they're working from their heart, when they're working from that place of sincerity, of that true will beyond just simple mental wants and excitements, there are going to be those difficult times. I think it's part of the unraveling of someone who actually gets a sense of proficiency in anything that they do, but especially with magic, you have to push through those times of doubt. And I always bring up my first Goetia experiment. Not my first Goetia experiment, but my first one that I did conducting, having all the tools, all the conjurations memorized, everything to a complete T, fasting for 9 days, and then being in retreat for the last 3, completely isolated, going as hardcore as I possibly could. And the first experiment was an absolute failure, to the point of I walked out of the circle in tears. I wasn't worried because there's no spirit around. I wasn't worried about any kind of repercussions. I mean, it was a total bomb. And I share that often with people, because it was so devastating for a long time. And I did consider, I'm like, did I really just get duped, and then am I wasting my time? And of course, there's those doubts. But I decided to try again. I refused to give up. And luckily, the next time that I did it, and this was after working with the Almadel angels, that I finally had that success. But I'll never forget that failure and how I felt. Even after all the recorded workings within my new book of me and my Scrier even came in. He's like, I have to admit, every time that I sit down, and even though we've had all of these successes, there's always a part of my mind of, oh God, what if nothing shows up? What if I can't see? What if I can't see anything? What if nothing happens? And he would tell me that, and I'd kind of laugh, chuckle too, because he's amazing, and we've been having these amazing experiences. But there's still that wonder and that doubt, and in some cases, I think that's perfectly healthy, natural, and possibly important too, because it allows one to be open and expect that things may not go the way that we hope. Even if there's been success after success, there's still going to be challenges. So.
Frater Ashen Chassan's new book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow, is available now from Azoth Press. Frater Chassan, we've been talking a lot about relationships, how things have changed, how things have stayed the same, sincerity, and if we may, I'd like to talk about an issue that we were just talking about before the podcast started, which is there are thousands and thousands of people in the Solomonic community, and many of them have either, friends, close friends, roommates, significant others, husband, a wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. Can we talk a little bit about how to explain to your significant other, if they are not a member of the ceremonial magic community, or if they love you but they think you do this kind of thing on the side where you go into a room somewhere and draw a circle on the ground, and they might not get it? I can tell you, just to complete disclosure, that when my wife and I are together, and when we just got done having dinner, she might say, "Oh, I'm going to go read. What are you going to do, Alex?" And I say, "Well, I'm going to go prep some holy implements and sit in a meditative circle for a while, a consecrated circle, and kind of memorize some angelic invocations." And she'll give me this look of just, what are you doing? I don't quite understand it. So what is your advice to people who might have a significant other, but they might not get magic? How do you tell someone about that?
Sure, and of course I think it definitely depends, with the person and what the relationship situation is to begin with. Naturally,
Sure.
if it's a friend or a roommate, and there kind of has to be that cordial thing. Sometimes you don't have to go into depth if you need some privacy or need to do some working where you're not disturbed. You can relate it in a way where you don't have to go into extensive detail about what you were doing, because a lot of people, it is true. It's regardless of our information age, one thing I love about the occult is that it remains the occult. It remains hidden, especially for people who are not really drawn, and their minds just seem to kind of skip over it. They're just not at the point in their lives or their incarnation where the subject is something that they can really latch onto. And I always find that fascinating. There's people in my family and otherwise that they're very open, but trying to speak about this kind of stuff, they start to get glazed over, and it's just not a good endeavor. But when I met my wife before we were married, we kind of went through, it was a very kind of humorous how we came together, and especially as we started living together and we were, began building a family and everything, the magical stuff took on oftentimes humorous, sometimes disturbing things, but to the point where she did really start to understand just how important and how real this stuff was. In the beginning, I think when we were dating and things would go on, I had gotten used to, even with previous relationships, that if someone stays with me long enough, if they're in my house, if they stay over, it's just a matter of time before something bizarre happens. Something moves off the shelf, they start seeing, a wisp of something moving across. And it's been my reality ever since, I was in my teens. I always knew that eventually I kind of have to explain a little bit about what's going on, the kind of things that I'm involved with. But my wife is a very no-nonsense, a lot of times literal, and just kind of speaks what's on her mind and dealing with things as she takes it. So it was really funny to see her kind of be exposed to this magical world of which she knew nothing about. It was a completely foreign thing. Even about religions and other things, she had really taken a step back from her upbringing, not really having any great experiences with it. So nothing even related to that was really in her life when I met her. But things happening, even though I would try to tell her that, I've had these encounters ever since I was younger, and part of the things that I do is learning how to work with these energies to make sure that things are okay and safe. And, I tried explaining it to her, and she admitted, she's like, when I first met you and everything, all these magical things you were telling about, I thought you were mostly full of it, is what she said. She said, I thought the things you claimed to have seen were just in your head, and, I thought you thought you were doing this stuff and encountering these things, but, I didn't have any frame of reference, so I really didn't believe it. But, then things would happen and she would see it, and she would, what's going on, and then she would see some of the things that I would do in response to any kind of disturbance or things like that. So she, it started, she was like, okay, there's something here. And even though she didn't have any real big experiences herself until later, even actually before we were married, some of the haunting things would be so prevalent that she was like, okay, you need to take care of this and go do things. So it became a regular thing of any instances. I had to remind her when things were mundane and, something wasn't going on, because eventually she started associating so much with spirit activity or, magical happenings. And it was kind of humorous because she almost did a 180 as far as her outlook. And then she told me, especially her appreciation of this stuff really, really shifted when she began seeing the work that Ben and I were doing, especially together, and how when we were talking about things, we would have the same exact experiences, we would encounter the same things, and that the information coming out it would blow all of our minds. And magic for me is such a thing that, in our house, I have a room that is solely dedicated and used for only magical workings, and it is a necessity. It's a thing in our in our life, in our family life, where she's definitely accepted long ago. There's no question that I have to have a space for this kind of working, because it's something that I do. It's not a hobby. It's not a mild interest or fad that, I'm drawn to. This is something I've been doing consistently for nearly 2 decades. And even before we were married, it was something that I've always been serious about and I've always done. And she, luckily for me, has been very agreeing. And I think part of the reasons for that is because these things do happen. And she realizes that things could get out of hand if, I wasn't here to kind of balance things out, make sure that, certain things didn't bother her, myself, or the kids now. And that's a very important thing. And then later on, after my house spirit, after Hiram came in, she is very, very, very fond of him, talks about him often, and each day or night when I go down to the room to talk to him and everything, she always wants to know exactly what he says and any questions or anything that she has for him. It's really funny to see because he's a topic of conversation often in our household, and she's so fun. But I have to remind her that if somebody's there, not to accidentally slip up and start speaking, because they're not going to quite understand about us referring to a spirit that resides in the skull down in my magical room. So.
Right. And that is certainly something that magicians can certainly take note of, is obviously, as you mentioned, your wife and yourself going through this process of starting out where, and I know that my wife can certainly relate, where it's kind of like, okay, what is this all about, to an awesome relationship. In fact, I remember reading, and you touched on this briefly, and I can't remember if this was in one of your blog posts or if this was on a previous podcast, but didn't you mention that when you were looking for a house to move into, that your wife would actually go and check out the magical room space for you a little bit and say, oh, this thing this is too small, Brian. Don't worry about it. Let's go to another one. That is awesome.
Yeah, and like I said, I'm grateful, but she just knew it was a matter of course. It's something that is a requirement that couldn't be weeded out around. I mean, it's that important, and she realizes that. And it's nice to have the relationship that we do that way, where she understands just how important that is. And one thing she did write down for me when we were talking about this and musing over magic in our relationship is, she wrote down, she says, I never had issue with him doing workings because they served a higher purpose. He wasn't attempting to gain power for himself or just over spirits. She says if a mage approaches their spouse or significant other with plans ahead of time, she said, that's great. Make plans, just like scheduling it. So if I have a big working, I try to tell her about it, and we
Nice.
make sure to kind of plan around that. She sees the higher purpose in it and the things that it's doing, not just for her family, but for other people. Even when I'm not doing workings, recording for himself, I have a lot of clients and such that come to me requesting this or that, and when I do those workings, and to see the benefits and see the changes that they make, for these people and everything, she definitely sees that as an important thing to do. So it's not, it's not just like a hobby, like working on a boat or motorcycle or something, even though that's fun, and I got plenty of other hobbies as well. But the magical thing is, it is one of my life workings. It's something that I do that's a part of me in a way to give back as well.
Absolutely. Certainly wise words from not only yourself, but from your wife as well. So I hope that all the mages or aspiring mages or people of the ceremonial magic community can certainly take note. And also to take note of this, too, if you'll permit me, Frater, the first book, Gateways Through Stone and Circle, you dedicated that to your wife, in fact. I actually have it right here in front of me mentioning, quote, "The completion of this work is dedicated to my wife, whose monumental patience has endured years of obsessive purchasing and creating of magical tools, the weathering the effects of periodic communications with spirits gone awry, and hobbies which very few people understand this day and age. In the day-to-day struggle of endless responsibilities, she has offered more assistance and support than I could ever repay." And it actually goes on, but I just think that's just so cool that you two have that relationship, and thank you just for sharing that advice too. Hopefully some other mages in relationships can take advantage of that.
Yeah, so you're very lucky if you're in a place where you can do that and you have someone to really support your efforts. That way it helps tremendously.
Absolutely. Just shifting from relationships a little bit, back to your book. One issue we hear about in the occult community, and you're much more familiar with this than I am, but one kind of hot topic that's being discussed right now is the lovely phrase that we call grimoire hopping. Essentially, borrowing from one grimoire to either supplement or complement another. And Frater Chassan, I mean, you are well known for a lot of things, but one of the things that you are certainly well known for is taking extreme care in following grimoires to the letter and in showing a great deal of fidelity to the process. And so, for example, with drawing spirits into crystals, to the letter, there are some slight additions that you mention in the book, in your first book, about, hey, if you want to include this, go for it, but here is the proper 100% way to do this. So you are known for that. And in your new book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow, as you mentioned before, you, with the Demon Kings as an example, let's say, you draw from other grimoires in certain capacities, like Dr. Thomas Rudd's invocations for the 4 Demon Kings. Can you just talk about this whole issue of grimoire hopping? I'm just kind of wondering, is this whole thing just being blown out of proportion in some discussions or threads? Does it even matter? I mean, especially for someone like you who's so well accomplished, does the concept of essentially borrowing make that big of a difference as it does in some online forums?
Sure, and I think it's a question, and it's always an ongoing discussion. And my stance on it right now is a lot of times I do analogy. I also teach martial arts, and I have been for almost 2 decades as well. And they seem, for some reason, it seems to help drawing analogies between them. And for this particular topic, I always associate it with somebody coming in wanting to learn the style that I'm teaching, but they're brand new to martial arts. And they're like, yeah, I was thinking about doing this and doing Krav Maga and Taekwondo because I really want to get, the best of all these systems and everything else. What I usually tell them is that, you can explore, but find something that really suits you first and really, really stick with that. Like, even if it's not with me, that's perfectly fine. Because the situation is that a tradition and even a grimoire, even though a lot of the classical ones share there's a lot of common elements. Just as in the Solomonic strain, when they're talking about Solomonic magic, there's a list of grimoires that fit that bill. They all kind of follow the same framework, even though the circles and the tools and such can have variation. I think it's important for someone who is exploring classical magic to really take a text and really take it as it is first, because you're establishing a lot of new blueprints, a lot of foundations on how to conduct something that is honestly overly complex in all of its variables and all of its elements. And there's a lot more that can usually go wrong than can go right. And when it comes to the pursuit of magic in general, it's a very confusing and widespread and diverse area for people. And you see, kind of the New Age movement and a lot of, these esoteric fads that, people are reaching out and, it's crystals and then it's, angel cards and all these, everything seems new and exciting and they just kind of see it all as the one thing, but they're really not. And the way that a magician, a mage, whatever, deals with the world is that they start to establish a set of codex and correspondences that really get embedded deep within their subconscious, and the ways that they relate to the spiritual world and to the magical world are established by these traditions of philosophical, spiritual, sometimes religious understanding, and they move across those lines. And the stronger those are, the more they can be accessed and the more they can be used by the magician to actually accomplish their goals. So a lot of these different paths and ideas, they have significance, but, for instance, everybody gets really interested in the Goetia, and they may glance at, the Lemegeton and kind of go over, like, oh, that's neat. I don't really agree with all the religious and Christian stuff, and I'm not going to do that. That'll take too much time to do that. So, let me read somebody else that this, kind of makes it temporarily and just repeat the spirit's name and they're supposed to appear. Well, my personal experience, because I've tried that, it never worked. It's a very, very watered down, very non-potent form, and I don't even really put it in the realm of evocation, because it starts getting weaker from that. Well, you can just kind of douse and, get yes or no questions, or just use, your perception. If you can feel them there, just tell them what you want, and then make sure you banish and see if it happens for you. To me, that's not evocation. For some people, that's what they want, and that's fine. But for me, I was very serious. I'm like, I've got to be able to see them. I got to be able to communicate with them and get more than yes or no questions. I need, a viable sense of communication. So I get something that's worthwhile, that I know that I'm having a true interaction. It broke down to what we were talking about before through authenticity and sincerity in this work. And if I just want to get to the good stuff and throw these things together, I'm not really taking this as something worthwhile. And at the same level, even if it's unconscious, I'm saying these spirits aren't that important, that powerful, or that meaningful where, I'm going to spend all this time, money, and preparation and everything really, trying to reach them. They just need to work for me. So there's some interesting psychological modes for that. And when it comes to grimoires, if we start mixing and matching too much without understanding the variables, like, well, I'm not going to wear an alb, so I'll just wear my regular clothes, or, that wand is pretty cool, so I'm going to grab that, this one doesn't have one. And there's a lot of assumptions made about why the experiment is the way it is. As I've worked through this, I've really, really found that, from the circle to the implements to the invocations, each one of these things has a very set and specific purpose that even though they've undergone alterations themselves up to the present grimoire that the person is working with, that the magician has gone for whoever was important for not just copying the information over, but actually recording it in the way that it was and the way that it was practiced, did so for a very specific reason. There's some variables there, and the way that they are used in evocation each have specific meanings to bring these things about. And when people start assuming what things are for, assuming what the invocation is for, assuming this, they're really replacing their imagination with a viable system of magic. And I've seen it fail over and over again. And, I've kind of stick to that because I tried that way myself early on. It was unsatisfactory for me. And I've had countless people, come to me, well, I've been trying it this way for years. I was never excited. But, when I really dug in, and I took my time to really understand and integrate what this stuff was about, I'm starting to see the results that I was after. So saying that, when somebody begins, just like drawing spirits in the circle, I didn't change or admit anything. I did it that way first, and it was excellent, and I could still do it that way. But just like everything, just like martial arts, you learn the moves, you do what the teacher says and everything, you start to incorporate and then hopefully intrinsically embody what this tradition is about. It is an initiation. Another thing that people miss in my first book, they're like, this isn't a book of initiation. It is a book of initiation if you follow it and you understand what that word actually means. You're being initiated to a very, very old and systematic way of doing spirit contact. Once you have achieved success and you're doing this and over this and you're speaking to the angels, and especially if you ask them, what's another way to contact you? Do you have anything else that would add to this? And if they give you something, then of course, that is part of the evocation where, like, yes, you can start changing things, you can start doing things, because the spirits themselves are giving you information about how to either contact them better or how to make a talisman or something to improve something else. And this is a lot what my second book is about too, that I've been doing these experiments over and over again, and I'm not changing anything based on assumption, because I've already done the experiment several times exactly as it's written. So now that it has become mine, it's become something that is thoroughly ingrained in who I am and what I do, that any change or anything that I'm learning for the spirits and everything is a very natural process. And I think that is the biggest key, is, starting from there, kind of honoring the tradition, really experimenting with that first, see what it does, and only after really getting kind of an understanding can, you go between grimoires or really, use these things in a more fluid system. But I just always caution person, it's not, to be anal, it's not to be a hardcore traditionalist, because don't change the tradition. It is because of my method of working, what I found works most successfully, and that is the process that I take into account with whatever I'm doing. I honor the information and the system first, and really try to figure it out before jumping to conclusions.
That's such a great point. I mean, for instance, if someone was to pick up Gateways to Stone and Circle and say, oh, okay, let's see, both Frater Chassan and Tritemius say I need an ebony wand. Cool, I'm just going to go out in my backyard and get a black-looking stick, and let's see, they need a circle. I got some of my, sister's pink chalk laying around. Let me draw that. And that just effectively devalues the process, but it also effectively rears these giant consciousness expanding roadblocks in the way where you actually can't even communicate at all with any of these entities, or if you do, it's some kind of weird pseudo psychological forcing that doesn't really yield results that are proper to the ceremonial rite itself. Would that be somewhat fair?
Definitely.
Okay. Switching gears a little bit, Frater, I do want to talk about something that I think complements your new book, Gateways Through Light and Shadow, very well, and it's something that involves talismans. And I think that if we can talk about talismans for a little bit, people who are familiar with your ceremonial magic work might also be very familiar with your, very beautiful, well-crafted talismans that you make for clients, among other items. And so for those who may not know, can you talk a little bit, Frater Chassan, about what is a talisman, and how is a talisman in the Solomonic context, how is that different from, say, a layman or a phylactery that's worn during a formal ceremonial operation?
Definitely, and excellent points, and especially between the differences. Just to give those to Stephen Skinner, who explains it very well in his Solomonic magical book series. He does very well. But starting with talismans, it's been a fascinating work for me. It's been very supportive of my magical works. It's been a huge win-win situation, at least for me, because not only do I get some financial assistance for clients that are see the worth and also the workability in these magical items that I make, but I also get to contact the beings and do this magical work on a pretty regular basis, which is always a positive thing for me, because the benefits of their office and just being around them during evocations and in the processes for making talismans is always just a wonderful experience. I've never had a negative experience, even with the Saturn ones, which can get a little iffy at times. They really can. So I try to. They're interesting, but I take extra precautions. But anyways, the way that I do talismans, and there's a few artisans out there. Some of them do amazing work, and even for mine, the craftsmanship, I'm so glad people appreciate them. I don't think I'm the best artisan out there. Some people are really metallurgists and jewelers, and they make amazingly beautiful things, and I definitely support that. But for me, the talisman definitely overall has to be functioning. So I think it's kind of a difference has been started to come more to light recently, but for some reason it hasn't for the longest time, where just finding a great alignment and astrological time setting to make these isn't enough to actually make them a talisman. And a lot of people, either will disagree or they're just not quite aware, but we don't have to look further than the Key of Solomon, which is the most complex book of evocation, but very accordingly that the whole process is intended to be used in conjunction to actually make these talismans. You have to be able to contact the spirits. The talismans within the Key of Solomon have angels and spirits associated with the planets attached to them. Oftentimes, their very names written on the talismans themselves. And not just writing a name on a piece of parchment or metal is enough to imbue that with the powers and offices of the spirit. You have to be able to contact them, and you have to be able to request or bind their office to the actual metal to make it a talisman. And this is something that I explain to clients when they're coming to me, and part of the reason that, for the pricing and the involvement that I do, it's not a quick, date where I can just sit down and engrave these things and, they're pretty and they're set to go just because I did it on the right hour. I make them in the correct days and hours, and I look for excellent timing, but that's the first part of the process. The second part is a very much unique system of evocation I've developed through traditional means and also bringing things together of empowering these talismans and bringing up contacting, making sure I have proper contact with the spirits involved and asking them, will you imbue this talisman with your powers? And if they say yes, I'm going to ask, what are some of the requirements? Do they need to keep it a certain way? Does it, need to be recharged? What are the best ways to actually use this? And that information that I get, which I find indispensable, I copy and it goes to the client as well. And I think they, highly appreciate that because they have something about, how does this thing work? In which ways is it going to work? So they get a lot of those questions answered instead of just, where your dreams will come true. Because a lot of them, if not most of them, work differently. And even sometimes I find between client and client, there will be some sort of alteration, something that they need to consider that's unique to them when they're working with this talisman. And for that effect, it becomes more of a viable magical object imbued with power that's actually working for them rather than a piece of jewelry or something that just kind of has liminal aspects of astrological associations and correspondence with them.
Do any of the talismanic arts that you engage in complement the drawing spirits into crystals, or is ceremonial magic proper and the Solomonic talismanic arts, are those pretty much separate? Is there any relationship?
There are going to be definitely relations there because simply when you become effective being able to conjure spiritual beings and you get that visible and audible presence and you get their sense of when they're there, it should permeate the room, if not the house, and there's a lot of effects that go with that. So I guess I'm talking about a degree of evocation that's fairly dynamic and hopefully achievable. I think if someone is successful, drawing spirits into crystal is definitely my go-to, my forte, and the system that I think I've used the most for one case and I've had the most success with. But I've been able to use others, and when the spirit's there, they're there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Success in one art could definitely lead over, hopefully, if the person's talented, to another one. So when I'm doing talismanic work and when the spirits arrive that way, even though it's not the exact procedure of drawing spirits into crystals, their arrival, their sense, and their communication is, pretty much on par of what it is when I'm doing the work with my Scrier by myself and drawing spirits into crystals. So it's definitely comparable. It's evocation. It's dealing and working with a spirit. But instead of lengthy discussions or, pursuits to have them do other things for me, the whole, of course, objective is for the empowerment, for the talisman and instruction in its use. So it's very much kept to that point. I guess is going to be the biggest difference that way.
You mentioned Dr. Stephen Skinner. From your perspective, can you talk about the difference between the phylactery, the layman, the talisman? How do you see that?
A talisman and let's have these charms or amulets are things that are made for clients or made for people. They're things made by the magician and given to another person that kind of have these spiritual and corresponding powers attached to them and can work separately. The phylactery or the layman, and sometimes these things, depending on the Grimoire and the tradition, can almost be the same thing, because they are the personal shield, so to speak, the emblem of authority and also the emblem of spiritual alignment and protection for the magician. It's not something given or made for a client specifically. It's something that's going to be worn for the magician themselves during the actual operations of evocation. So you're talking about the Solomonic hexagram and pentagram, especially familiar with the keys of Solomon, the Lemegeton, the Goetia, things like that. Those are going to be phylacteries that the magician wears themselves, and they don't have particular attributes to any planetary or anything lesser than usual ultimate divinity. It's going to represent kind of the highest authority, usually God in this sense, and being able to be, like I said, protected and in the stance of divine authority when dealing with spirits. So that's going to be your phylactery. The layman a lot of times will have that divine symbolism, but it'll also include the particular sigil, name, and or symbol of the spirit or angel that you are attempting to contact, and it is something worn also as a badge of direct connection, but also authority. When it's combined with those divine symbols as basically reaching out into the universe, saying, hey, I'm contacting this being specifically and only this being for right now. And, I am within the highest authority to reach particularly to this spirit and bring them forward. So hopefully that is a somewhat clear answer for the listeners.
Yes, that is fantastic. And in fact, Frater, you touch on something, this is a question that I got from another member of the Solomonic community when I mentioned that I would be doing an interview with you. Someone mentioned if you could talk about the influence between ceremonial magic and the Cabala. There's a lot of discussion about this, and I know that you've been at the forefront of some of these conversations, but does the Cabala in any way, in its Hermetic grimoire sense, Kabbalistic thought for the magician, does that apply in any way, shape, or form, or do you involve it in your consciousness at all when you're doing a operation using drawing spirits into crystals? An example could be, someone out there who's obsessed with the Cabala and who's a magician might say, okay, so I conjure thee, O thou creature of fire, by him who created all things. And they say, okay, that's fire, that's Gevurah, that I'm totally going to channel Samael, and I'm going to do Mars and fire. And people all of a sudden start layering Kabbalistic thought inside a ceremony. Can you just kind of talk about that in terms of, is there a relationship between Kabbalistic Hermetic thought and when you step inside the circle with your Scrier?
Before getting into the events of my latest book, I did attend a class under a rabbi, specifically in Cabala. Very much enjoyed it. I learned a ton, and I came to being able to kind of appreciate the Torah and the Old Testament and a lot of these biblical things that I'd pretty much abandoned, and being able to look at them in a whole new way. In his discussion about the corresponding things, even with the archangels and polarities and everything being arranged correctly within the tree of life and with each Sifrot. I can totally see the dissension there and how things don't quite fit, especially when you try to do a literal one-for-one thing and everybody tries to cram one system into the other, and it's completely true. You're going to run into a lot of paradox and things that don't translate perfectly, especially rationally, the way that you'd want them to. And there's been, kind of some uproar with this, and it hasn't been a huge issue because I would initially say, yes, Cabala and, even the Tree of Life and the Sifrot, that those frameworks and those kind of, I guess, spiritual trainings and teachings, they're still important for me and they're still meaningful, but I don't try to do a one-for-one, and when I do evocation, I guess I don't try to do as much as a Kabbalistic association, kind of like you would find in the Golden Dawn and other systems of evocation. I don't do it that way because that is a little bit of mixing systems, and also I don't think it's completely necessary. People have to understand that when they're learning these magical paradigms and everything, they are sacred. It's still sacred, but that doesn't mean that they're completely literal that way, and one-for-one paradigms of being able to associate everything and the spiritual framework and archetypical universe that way. And I think that's where a lot of people kind of run into issues where they try to either force it or they completely abandon it instead of taking it and learning from it from where it is. So, when it comes to the Tree of Life and trying to understand, I guess, certain beings or concepts, if they're not fitting, then don't relate them that way. When, there's even the argument that I kind of go over even in my book. Well, is Archangel Michael, is he of the sphere of the sun, and is he the ruler of Mercury and Hod, and who goes where, and you can only have one, and I talked to the angels themselves, and they gave kind of a very kind of poetic response that actually had a lot of meaning for me. But even beyond the reasons that they gave, I got the clear message of, look, a magician is one who reaches to, when you're talking about an archangel, you're talking about a being and energy of vast amounts of power and energy, and also workings quite beyond what I think anyone of any system at any time has ever seen the completion of, or understands the completion of what that is about. When we're reaching towards one of the archangels through either a Sephirotic correspondence or even a planetary correspondence, we have to understand that they're not defined by these associations. We as magicians and everything, we're associating, we're contacting the particular frequency, the particular office and authority that they do have with us, and can easily come back and relate to us, assist us with, or instruct us about, but it's not a defining point for them. And I think that's really, really important, that when we're dealing with spirits, just as tradition, if we're contacting an Egyptian god or something else, understanding the kind of language and tradition and foundation of how they're being used to contact, I think can be very helpful for the magician wanting to get a true working for them, but also that these beings are not defined either by that time period or even quite that, by the tradition, as if they're not able to see beyond it or work beyond it. It doesn't quite work that way. It's from our end going towards them that these spiritual blueprints, maps, traditions, and everything really assist us. And like Nick said, if too many things are colliding and everything, don't try to fit them together, because it's not going to be helpful. Because when you run into things that don't quite work, it's going to cause issues. So in my own practice, I guess I have these two things, and in my magical toolbox, so to speak. But I haven't run into them butting up heads together yet, because I guess they're not such strong ties that they all have to fit together perfectly. There are ways of understanding the spiritual world, the ways of understanding divinity and the different manifestations thereof. Because if we try to take the whole thing into account, it just gets overly overwhelming and confusing. So when we follow a certain line, we have to find the way that we can get directly there and make the most sense of it. So if it's evocation, if I'm dealing with one of the archangels, the planetary system and the levels of correspondences that I've used so far are fine. I don't try to need to contact them and make sure that they fit into this Kabbalistic associated viewpoint as well.
And you bring up a great point, Frater, which is that these archangelic beings, if they have an association, like Michael has the association of being in the fourth heaven, soul, for example, and is associated with virtues and the angelic choir order of virtues and the Renaissanceian kind of aspect, that is an association that humans use when interacting with Michael, but Michael, being beyond space-time as we currently know it, isn't bound by soul or isn't bound by these things. These angelic beings, if they seem to be different, or if they seem to adjust to our own consciousness, or if they seem to take on attributes like Zadkiel with mercy, for example, in Jupiter, those things, those associations are really for the benefit of allowing humans to understand these things rather than the other way around, that these things are kind of chained up almost to these associations. Would that be somewhat fair?
Definitely correct. Yeah, that's definitely been my experience of how this works, and that they're useful, and they can be excellent tools for being able to contact these beings, and also to be able to contact them towards a line of a certain kind of energy or correspondence of the reason why you're contacting, what you hope to learn, what you hope to achieve, and benefit from them. So it makes sense. But yeah, we get stuck if we try to start thinking that our blueprints or modes of perceiving them are, the end all perceptions of what these beings are capable of. I think that would be a mistake.
Absolutely. I'd like to talk with you, especially with your vast experience as a ceremonial magician, about something that Dr. Skinner points out in his book on Greco-Egyptian magic, where he talks about these three different phases of spiritual interaction, and he kind of lays them on a spectrum. As you know well more than I, he basically says, in the Greco-Egyptian world of Alexandria and, around the turn of the millennium, there was religion, which was very public, and there was a priest there who would interact on behalf of a congregation. There was magic, which was very private, where a client would come to you under the dead of night and secretly say, I need this material need, whether it's, love or power or wealth, etc. But then in the middle, he talks about this thing called the mystery tradition, and he talks about this rather than being for a specific objective that might be a more material objective in magic. He talks about or being religious in terms of you just kind of show up every week and repeat what they say. This thing seems like a huge consciousness-expanding experience where initiates would literally raise their consciousness to a point of interacting one-on-one with the gods. And I'm just curious, you've been through some amazing experiences, obviously, you and your Scrier, especially when you start talking about angelic or super celestial beings. Can you talk about your thoughts on the mystery tradition, quote-unquote, and its relation to magic, especially angelic magic? Is there any interaction there? I know that Dr. Skinner mentions that the mystery tradition basically got dropped off from Western history, and it hasn't really resurfaced, whereas magic in the Grimoires has gone through. Can you just share your thoughts a little bit about how you see the relationship between magic and this Greco-Egyptian mystery tradition?
Sure. And I think for one, speaking of the mystery traditions, some modern equivalents of how some people would see, the different magical lodges and even possibly in some strains of the Freemasons and things like that kind of being perhaps mystery traditions in their own modern right now, or at least derivatives thereof. That magic and foremost, and I agree with Dr. Skinner too, that when magicians are doing the work, it was always aimed at practical ends, basically designed regardless of the magician's alignment towards, I can't even say good or evil, but I guess for selfish reasons or for gain and power, or if they were done for reasons out of service, which you would find too is even some of the cunning men and women of the day, they would perform services. They, were like the doctors and assisted on those various levels, and they did it for practical reasons. Yes, they got compensation, and it was their profession, and they needed to make a living. But they were somehow called, just like the shamans, to perform a service for their communities. So magic being in magicians and whatever terminology is used that way, always kind of having a practical role of being able to serve and assist people and cause various happenings there that way, and that is their role. And it's also the difference, I guess one could say, between magic and mysticism, whereas a mystical path or a mysticism in the mystery traditions is coming at spiritual interaction and also pursuing some people would say a passive way, but that wouldn't be quite correct either, because you're actively seeking and going through initiatory experiences in one degree or another to heighten your perceivable levels of existence in whatever form that is. I mean, that's as broadly as I can say it. And of course, these things, blending with religion, and if I can remember correctly, Dr. Skinner even does talk about, how some of these things would kind of blur, but they definitely do have their distinctions as well, where religion really served a function in the community and could be for very political or practical or just kind of systematic cultural phenomenon. And of course, you're going to have your mystics, within that tradition. I mean, there's mystics pretty much in every religion that I'm aware of that yeah, they adhere to a religious thing. They may even serve a function as a cleric, as a priest, as somebody that fulfills that role and keeps that going. But it is very much a personal thing that even if they're not involved in another mystery tradition with other members, they are in a mystical state where they take the scriptures and they take this path of the religion and really go into what I would call the inner secrets, the inner learnings, the deeper understandings of what this stuff is about. Anything else about mystery tradition that I could put to that is a lot of these people are not necessarily, and maybe very few, would be magicians. They would be more interested, involved in raising themselves and possibly others up, but being more supplicant to the deities or to the higher powers that they realize, or being more passively open to receive anything that might happen. And a big distinction, I guess, between is that through the mystery traditions or through mysticism, there's a seeking and maybe a hope for spiritual interaction or a spontaneous occurrence where there's enlightenment or there's an encounter of a spiritual being or this thing. Whereas in magic, it is very, very much an endeavor that is done consciously and done so willfully, where you're causing something to happen. You're working towards an end that you're bringing a spiritual being there and in contact, and usually connecting them for some practical reason. And it's very specific, and you initiate that contact, you initiate the purpose for the working, and also initiate what the supposed outcome is supposed to be. And that's definitely the work of the wizard or the magician and whoever, and how that differs. But that's pretty much my thoughts on, kind of looking into these various aspects.
That is that's probably the most succinct summary that one could make on that topic, and certainly I think it certainly will help the magical community to hear you talk about that, because specifically of your in-depth research and fidelity that you show to ceremonial magic, but also to history and to kind of looking and comparing at different aspects of it. Frater, as we wind down here, I definitely want to talk about where people can find you on Facebook and your blog and the book, and an upcoming trip to Europe if you'd like to talk about that. But last thing I wanted to talk about topic-wise is the concept of Gnosticism and the concept of spiritual elevation in a Gnostic context. And I'm just wondering, can you share with the listeners a little bit about your interest in Gnosticism and how Gnostic tenets, Gnostic philosophy can help inform your own consciousness regarding when you step in the circle drawing spirits into crystals operations, for example? Can you just talk about Gnostic thought and how that influences your ritual magic or your day-to-day life?
Sure, and I'll try to do my best. It's a great question, and I'll try not to get too long-winded because it's quite a process about how I came to Gnosticism. First and foremost, I have to say that I am not I wouldn't say I'm a good Gnostic. I appreciate the ideals and very much adhere to the idea of gnosis, but sometimes that gets confusing. Leading from and back again, my magical work and work as a magician, as someone that does things for the community, these interaction with the angels and taking everything quite seriously has led me kind of towards that mystery tradition, and then as a means of furthering this overall path that I'm on. So I entered into seminary with the Apostolic Johannite Church, which definitely accrues itself as Gnostic in senses and everything, even though it encompasses a lot of these ideas of Christian mysticism as such. I would have to say that the perception of appreciating other people as sincere fractals of this divine being, that we each share this shard of light, or this divine flame, if you will, that's shared around with each person, has really changed my concept of not only how I deal with people, but how I view the world, and also what my purpose for magic is. And this is something that the angels themselves continually challenged both myself and my Scrier on, was you're having these amazing encounters, and we're happy to teach you, these lessons and do these things for you, but what are you going to do with them? How are you going to give back? And more than anything else beyond tradition, religion, how you perceive the Divine Father, whatever, their main concern, what they kept on bringing up, was how are you serving your fellow man? How are you using this to make the world better? I mean, that was their primary thing, and I had to really think about that, and also my house spirit and everything. It was something that comes up. So it became serious, and within this practice, and it being a sacred practice, really learning the liturgy and coming into the stance of more of a priestly role, of nothing else beyond being available to people and being able to be of service, even when you're not in the mood for it, even when it's not convenient. Really trying to take more of this aspect on. The Gnostic path, that way of appreciating and doing what I can to support and maybe draw out so people can recognize the sacred flame within themselves, seemed like something that I should really consider seriously and within my magical practice, and also dealing with people outside of the magical path, just in my day-to-day, who might not be care to be involved in magical things, but they're searching for something in their own way, and am I able to assist with that in any form possible? So very vaguely on that end is kind of my call to appreciating those forms of Gnosticism, and also the mystery Christian tradition, and it spans many different thought tradition, religious tradition, spiritual traditions, and I like that it is very much inclusive, and it doesn't, butt up the heads of people. It's not a conversion thing. It's not trying to get, somebody to believe what I believe, or, do what I do, but really acknowledging them, trying to meet them on their ground, and so that they can find their own way, they can discover their own flame. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much, the bare bones of what that means to me at this time, and my involvement with the Gnostic Church at this time as well.
Certainly a valuable thing to hear, especially from someone like yourself. I guess, Frater Chassan, there's so much more that we could cover, but I do want to talk just very briefly, if you'd like to share about an upcoming trip that you have to Europe later this year, if you want to talk about that, and also can you share a little bit about where people can find you on Facebook and your blog, stuff like that?
Sure. So yeah, I'm really hoping that this workshop that I have going on, hopefully in Sussex and the UK, will be in late October of this year. I'm really excited, nearing Halloween in the British Isles, and I haven't been there since I was 15, so it'll be really nice to go back. But it'll be 3 days, and I will be discussing a wide range of topics, basically covering my practice and people who are aspiring to be successful in evocation, to be successful in magical workings, and to have these encounters with these amazing spiritual beings. I'll put the link back up on my Facebook page, and that is definitely probably the easiest way to find me and to contact me or figure out what's going on in my world is the Frater Ashen Chassan Facebook page. I also do have a page specifically just for my author work under that same name. My blog is something that I'm always embarrassed about because I have not been keeping up with it. It's something that I need to put more workings into, but A Magician's Workings is my blog site. Hopefully I'll be able to post there more frequently and do things. It seems like I'm always trying to juggle in which ways that I'm kind of sharing with the world what I'm doing. But those are the best ways to find me and to contact me that way. And if someone is interested in signing up for this workshop, I've done lectures and I've done smaller workshops before, but this is definitely going to be one of my biggest ones. And I'm going to pull out a lot of stops and really share with people who make the effort to come to this one, hopefully information that they've been searching for to better their own practice and help them along in the best ways that I can.
Frater Chassan, I cannot thank you enough. The depth of your experience is just fantastic, and of course, you're welcome back on the podcast any time. I guess as we wrap up here, is there anything else, any other advice, tips, anything else coming to mind that you might have for someone in the ceremonial magic or the Solomonic magic community? Any kind of closing thoughts for the listeners?
I think always when we're talking about evocation is coming to a place, whatever tradition, whatever system that one chooses to make honest and variable contact with these beings, is to really come to a point of practice of breaking through the mental chatter, and sometimes it can be the social media chatter about what these things are supposed to be like, how they're going to appear, how they're going to communicate, and really remove those out of the consciousness as best as one can before you begin to practice. This is definitely something that you want to come at completely open and unassuming, so that you can really get the benefit of just the amazing things that can come across and that do. And so that they can be as authentic as possible, so that they can be as variable as possible, and to move past doubt and to keep practice even when you set everything up and you're going through this and it doesn't at first achieve the results. Keep with it. Don't abandon it. Don't give in to despair, because it really is a process, something that can increase with clarity, with objectivity, with the amazing kind of sensations and phenomena that can go on with this, but not be completely glued to them ahead of time. Learn the system that you're working from, really put in effort, continue to practice it, and work so from a point of your mind of being willing to be open to what comes across, so that when the experience happens, when it's meant to happen, can be some of the most beautiful and authentic things that you may perceive. It has been for me. I can't compare anything else in my life. I've had a lot of wonderful things in my life, but the encounters with these beings has been second to none, and is why I continue to do what I do, even if no other further wishes or achievements were granted. Just to be in their presence is worth it enough for me. So that would be my encouraging statement.
Frater Chassan, thank you so much just for taking the time and helping us uncork the uncommon today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure.
And thank you for listening to this episode of the Glitch Bottle Podcast and helping us uncork the uncommon this fine day or night, or wherever you happen to occupy space-time in your occult lairs, your summoning towers, or your cloistered libraries of the esoterically awesome. You can check out previous episodes and other magical Glitch Bottle news on YouTube, youtube.com/glitchbottle, and you can download episodes on our blog, glitchbottle.blogspot.com. Please make sure also to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, and also you can follow us on Twitter at glitchbottle, all one word. Our intro music is the track Tornado by David Zeste. Our magical interest is fueled by sincerity, passion, amazing guests, and a copious amount of clinking coffee cups. Until next time, this is Alexander F. reminding you to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.